the best double-pointed knitting needles. Do you want to start your first pair of socks, or are you not satisfied with your current set and now you are looking for the best double-pointed knitting needles? Then this video was made for you. Here on my tray I got tons of different double-pointed knitting needles, and together we'll take a close look at all of them. There's ChiaoGoo, HiyaHiya, Addi, Knitter's Pride, Lykke, and so much more. I'll talk about the different materials, the tips, and of course the knitting speed and the durability. I will also include tons of really close-up macro shots of all of them, so you can see the tips up close. What I won't be doing is I won't name a winner. If you've seen my last video, then I don't think there are the best double-pointed knitting needles. Preferences, projects, and knitting styles differ so much that I feel it's much better to, just show you all the details, the pros and the cons of the different materials, and then you can decide for yourself which ones you want to buy. I even included a short review of the Signature Needle Arts DPNS, which costs $67 per set at the end of this video. Right here at the beginning of this video, I would also like to point out that this is a non-sponsored video. I bought all of these needles myself, I used them myself, and I feel it's a matter of trust and the only way I can share my unbiased and unfiltered opinion with you. Anyway, let's head over to my desk so you can find out the best double-pointed knitting needles for you. But before, like this video right now to support my work, and make sure to comment below with your favorite DPNs or the ones you want to buy. I'd be more than interested to hear what everyone else is knitting with. I will also comment with my favorite DPNs, so make sure to check that out. I was thinking long and hard how to put all these different brands into one cohesive video, and I decided to start with a general overview of the different brands, close-up shots of the needles and so on, and then I'll talk about the difference between all the different materials. But if you want to view it the other way around, I added chapters to this video so you can easily navigate around. Let's start with ChiaoGoo. So what I really love about these double-pointed knitting needles is that you can buy a full set. And these sets are typically much cheaper than buying each size individually. And the set, it does come in a really nice little pouch. For interchangeable knitting needles, that's quite common, but for some reason, for DPNs, it isn't. You always end up buying your own cases because the sets, they often come in cheap plastic bags, and often the bags are really big. And this bag, this little pouch here, is quite nice. The needles themselves are made from stainless steel. The needle size is engraved here on the body of the needles. And the steel is quite, well, for lack of a better word, it's quite rough. And you definitely notice a sound when you slide them across each other. If you compare the finish of the ChiaoGoo versus the HiyaHiya and the Knitter's Pride double-pointed knitting needles, then these needles are the ones that are the slowest and offer the most resistance. Now, mind you, they're still smooth metal needles, but there is a noticeable difference. So if you feel you want something that isn't super slippery, these could be perfect. These double-pointed knitting needles are quite durable. Only the size 0 here, you can see you can bend them quite a lot. So eventually they will end up crooked. The larger sizes, like size 3 or so, that's not a very common issue. The tips are sharp but not super sharp, so I guess you could say they are very versatile. The taper here is actually quite short, so that's definitely something you will notice when you are knitting a pattern, that requires a lot of double increases or decreases or cables. If you compare the tips with, say, the HiyaHiya stainless steel needles, then you will instantly notice that the tips of the HiyaHiya needles are much sharper, and the taper here is much longer on top of that. What I personally don't understand is ChiaoGoo offers quite some small sizes and bigger sizes when it comes to circular needles, but their smallest available size for their double pointed knitting needles is size 0 or 2 millimeters. So I don't know why that is. I wish there was some more size diversity. Number 2, Addi. Addi offers quite a lot of different double pointed knitting needles as well. I'm not going to talk about their special products here because I feel they are a bit more difficult to compare, but they do have standard aluminium double pointed knitting needles and metal double pointed knitting needles. So these are called colibri. And what makes these DPNs so unique is that they have, the other way around, that they have 2 different tips. So on this side here, you have blunt tips, and here on this side, you have these super sharp lace tips. And this actually makes a lot of sense. First of all, when you're knitting in around the stitches that are on this needle here, the left needle, well, it's basically just a stitch holder. So if this was a pencil, it still wouldn't matter, but a blunt tip here makes things easier because often you push your finger against the needle. So if it's a sharp and you end up hurting your fingertip a lot. But here on this side, you need the sharp tip with the long taper to really knit those complicated stitches. So you really get the best of both worlds. The taper here of these lace tips is super long and it's very sharp, so it's a joy to knit with. And also those needles, they are super light. Well, Addi says on its website that those are the lightest knitting needles or double pointed knitting needles on the market. I don't know about that, but they're certainly very light. The coating, well, due to the coating, they are maybe not the fastest of the lot, but they're still fast. And again, at one point or another, these metal needles will end up crooked. In fact, I would say it's actually remarkably easy. See? I didn't even use a lot of force. So, I mean, you can bend them back into shape, but that's definitely something you should know. These will end up, well, they won't last a lifetime. Addi also offers these standard coated steel needles as well, but for whatever reason they are only available as 20 centimeters and they aren't hollow. So the needles are super heavy. And as you can see, the tips here, they are quite blunt and have a rather short taper. So all in all, I'm not sure how much sense this product makes. I mean, they are super fast to knit with, but due to the sheer weight and the length, I'm not really sure for what kind of project I would use them. Number 3, Knitter's Pride. Knitter's Pride or Knit Pro, how they are marketed in Europe, they probably have the largest number of different kinds of double pointed knitting needles available, so I'll try to go through them a bit quicker. Their standout product are certainly the Karbonz needles. Here the body is made from carbon and the tips are coated metal. So they are super fast to knit with while they are still warm and super light. And the carbon, it offers enough friction so the stitches don't slide off easily. So I feel it's kind of the best of 2 worlds. These needles are probably the most durable double-pointed knitting needles you will ever find, especially if you love small sizes. Sure, I mean, as you can see, you can bend them, but they will always snap back. So if you love knitting with a size 0 needles or below, then this is probably the best available product. I mean, sure, there is this little kink here at the transition between the tips and the carbon body, but it's nothing you will ever notice. You know, if you know interchangeable knitting needles where there is this transition here and sometimes the yarn gets caught here, then, you know, this kink here is nothing like that. It's, you know, I knit so much with these needles and seriously, it's nothing I ever noticed. Eventually the coat, I don't know how well you can see this, but eventually the coating will rub off a bit and the tips, they may break off as well. They're just glued to the body. But if you compare these Karbonz with any other small size double pointed knitting needles available on the market, they are by far and wide the most durable. And the best part, these are available down to size 4 zeros or 1 millimeter. So if that is something you are interested in, then here and there I have to say these are really the best double pointed knitting needles. When it comes to the larger sizes, the verdict is less clear because the tips are somewhat blunt. And you know, if you like to knit with size 3 or above, the durability usually isn't that much of an issue. So I do believe there are better needles. But just in case, I have a full review of the full Karbonz needle range here on my channel. I'll link it to you up in here. Knitter's Pride also offers coated metal needles. They are called Nova or Nova Platina. And I do believe they are probably the fastest available double-pointed knitting needles on the market. They are quite heavy. The tips are quite sharp, but not stiletto sharp like the HiyaHiya needles. And obviously the smaller sizes, they will end up crooked over time. But other than that, I feel it's a pretty solid product for getting a plain vanilla sock done as fast as possible. And there they are actually my personal favorites. There are also the Knitter's Pride Zing needles that's coated aluminium. They are quite nice. And if you compare them to the Addi needles, they are much slicker and faster to knit with, especially because here the tips are polished. But I do have to say that the tips are somewhat weird. I don't know how well you can see this. They are almost square. So I don't think these are good needles for complicated patterns, but if you want light needles for beginner patterns, I think these can work really well. If you are a subscriber, then you might already know that I knit a lot with the Knitter's Pride Dreamz or Symphony hardwood needles here on my channel. And by the way, if you aren't, hit that subscribe button right now. I think they are really, really pretty. The tips are, well, sharpish, but not too sharp, so rather versatile. These needles are also very light and warm, but, you know, a bit slower to knit with. And I think these make a lot of sense for larger needle sizes. You know, when you don't want to knit with heavy metal needles, but you don't want to knit with bamboo or plastic either, which might be a bit too slow. And if you want the best from both worlds, then the Knitter's Pride Royale are probably a good option because these have a hardwood body and metal tips. They have the same tips. And there is this, I don't know how well you can see this, there is this little hole here. It's probably used for screwing or the glue or I don't know what, but you don't notice it. The transition here is a bit more pronounced, but it's probably nothing you really notice while knitting. So overall, it's quite the nice and very pretty product. They are a bit more on the expensive side, and I would probably stay away from buying the super small sizes because they are quite flexible and will eventually break rather fast. But still a very nice option for those who want wooden needles but metal tips. Let's talk about the HiyaHiya double pointed knitting needles next. As you can see, these tips here are stiletto sharp, and and the taper is quite long, so if lace socks are your thing, then you will love these needles. As I already said, compared to ChiaoGoo, they are a bit slicker and the taper is quite a bit longer. So these are perfect for lace knitting. HiyaHiya also has the same needles, the same stainless steel needles with blunt tips, in case that's something you want to look into. I sadly don't own a set. And if you compare these stainless steel needles with aluminum, they are quite a bit more durable. So this is size 0, and they will end up crooked at one point, but here for the size 3, you will have quite the hard time bending them. One brand that has gained a lot of popularity in recent years is Lykke. I think they are somewhat connected with Knitter's Pride and Knit Pro, but I'm actually not really sure how that works. Anyway, they produce these super nice driftwood double pointed knitting needles, and I mean, just look how pretty these needles are. Aren't they gorgeous? So, like all wooden needles, the tips are somewhat blunt and the surface is polished, but not all that smooth, so you still notice a tiny bit the grain of the wood. So I would put them somewhere in between your average bamboo needle and most hardwood needles. It's probably a product that makes more sense for advanced beginners or people who like knitting with bamboo needles, but they want something prettier or more durable. Now, I'm not entirely sure what these connectors here in the middle are for, so this side and this side is glued to the middle, but I appreciate that they printed the needle size on it. The transition here, in case you were wondering, let me see if I can get this in focus. The transition here is super smooth, so you don't notice it at all. So that middle piece is missing if you buy smaller needles like these 2mm needles. I think this is just spray painted or something like that. I personally would be very careful when you buy such super small needles because quite honestly, I think they break just too easily. I quickly also wanted to include Prym here. It's a brand popular in Europe, and here in Germany you will find them basically in any craft store. They produce these standard aluminium needles, and I knitted my first pair of socks on these needles, and as you can see they went through quite a lot. So I feel they really helped me on my knitting journey, but I wouldn't use them anymore. They are somewhat slow to knit, even though the tips here are actually quite nice. And the same could be said about their bamboo needles. They are very affordable. They actually have quite nice tips. So if you want to start knitting and learn how to knit in the round, these actually could be very nice products. Prym is also now producing these interesting carbon technology double-pointed knitting needles. And these are, they are so light, you literally don't notice them. And they have these interesting tips here and these grippers. So these are special ergonomic needles, and I could well imagine those could be a nice choice for people with problems in their joints. I don't know, arthritis or carpal tunnel syndrome, where you want the lightest needle possible, but still a nice way to grip them. I have to say, I'm just showing you these here because I don't have these problems. So for me, it's very, very difficult to judge how well these work or not. Still, a very, very interesting product. And you can see they are almost square. So they are super nice to grip and so light. The last needles I want to show you are the signature Needle Arts double pointed knitting needles. And I do have to admit I was a bit hesitant to include them in my video at all, but decided to do it anyway because the name will appear at one point or another. Why? Because these 5 needles here, they cost around $67 US. That is a lot. Compare that to all the other brands I mentioned in this video so far, where you can get a set for around $10 US or sometimes even much less. So you could buy a whole set of Knitter's Pride Zing with 6 different sizes. And the Zing, they are also coated aluminum, and you would still have some change. So that is a lot. Still, the important question is, are they worth it? It's a bit difficult, but the needles are super light. The tips are very sharp with a very, very long taper. And the tips are also super, super slick. While the body, it just has the right kind of friction to keep the stitches on the needles. But because the tips here, they are polished, it doesn't really slow you down. Before I got my first pair, I was very well apprehensive, I guess. I mean, $67 US for double pointed knitting needles. I mean, how much better would these have to be to justify such an astronomical price? And I do have to say, they are really and truly a joy to knit with. It's very smooth knitting, and I would actually be inclined to say that if money is no consideration, they are probably the best double pointed knitting needles on the market. They are fast and they sort of glide through your knitting like a hot knife through butter. It's actually quite hard to pinpoint why they are so good, but they really are. But it's not like these needles were perfect, and I'm not even talking about the price. First of all, the coating itself. I don't know what it is, but these needles produce a very distinctive and almost annoying sound. So when they glide across each other, it makes this sort of swishy chirping kind of noise. And I mean, when you're knitting in the round, this happens with every turn. So if you are a very sensitive person, then that's probably something that will annoy you a lot. And a truly negative side for me personally is that the smallest available size is 2.25 millimeters, which means for a knitter like me, this brand basically has little to offer because I rarely knit in the round on such big needles. Half of my socks were knit with 2 millimeter needles, and the same applies to all of my softies. So the needles are nice but really expensive. And you know, they're certainly not 10 times as nice compared to, say, the Knitter's Pride Zing. Maybe 20 to 25% better, which I guess is still something. Part number 2. Now that I showed you all the different brands, I quickly wanted to talk about the difference between all the materials in case you are still hesitant. Especially as I was not really able to mention every single brand on the market. I mean, I really own a lot of needles and I knit a lot on double pointed knitting needles, but it would probably take a lifetime to test them all. Let's start with bamboo. Generally speaking, bamboo is a great choice for beginners. Why? Well, 3 reasons really. Bamboo needles are usually fairly cheap, they are very light, and bamboo has a unique kind of friction that makes it much harder for stitches to fall out. And you know, as a beginner, knitting with double pointed knitting needles will feel a bit like, you know, juggling with raw eggs. By the way, make sure to check out my video on how to knit with double pointed knitting needles where I go through everything step by step. I'll link it to you up in here. So the 3 reasons I just mentioned really make things a lot easier for beginners. You don't want anything that is too slick or too heavy. On the negative side, these needles are somewhat slow to knit with. Also, the tips are usually not especially sharp, so probably not the ideal option for lace socks and complicated patterns. And bamboo is not the most durable material, so at one point they will break or splinter, especially here at the tips. Don't expect them to last a lifetime. Then again, you probably don't need your beginner needles to last a lifetime either. Very similar to bamboo needles are hardwood needles. The advantage of hardwood is that it is almost as light as bamboo, but they are typically quite a bit more durable. Also, they are usually quite a bit smoother, but not so slick that stitches drop too easily. It feels very warm and light in your hands. The needles usually have a very versatile but not too sharp tip. I am not sure if it's a real advantage, but hardwood double-pointed knitting needles are certainly the prettiest of them all, at least in my opinion. On the negative side, they can be quite pricey. Also, they too break, especially when we are talking about the smaller needle sizes below 3 millimeters. They are not super fast either, and again, the tips are probably not all that great for any serious lace work or other complicated patterns, but for things like, Fair Isle or some ribbings, they can be quite perfect. Another good choice for beginners are these aluminium needles. They are probably as light as bamboo, but typically the tips are a bit sharper. They are quite a bit more durable and have quite a lot of friction, so the stitches don't slip off all that easily either. On the negative side, I personally feel that the surface almost feels a bit sticky, so they are rather slow to knit with, and when we are talking about these smaller sizes, they typically bend very, very easily. Addi, Knitter's Pride or Signature Needle Arts also produce aluminium needles, but with a coating, and typically these come in tons of super fun colors. The coating, it adds a nice grip to the middle section, while the tips are typically polished to enable a super fast knitting speed. Also, these needles have very sharp tips normally. On the negative side, these double-pointed knitting needles are often not available in super small sizes, and if they are quite easy to bend and end up crooked really fast. And obviously, while nice, the coating means that they are usually fast, but not super fast. Then there are stainless steel needles. ChiaoGoo and HiyaHiya are probably the most prominent brands. These needles have sharp to super sharp stiletto tips, perfect for lace, while the stainless steel makes them slick, but there is still a tiny bit of friction. These needles are typically hollow in the middle, which makes them quite light. Personally, I am not the biggest fan of the noise these needles typically make, and obviously metal needles will end up crooked at one point or another, especially if you are using super small sizes. Some brands also offer alternative tips that are a bit blunter. If you want it super fast and slick, then coated metal needles will be your best friend. These are probably only a good choice for advanced and tight knitters, as stitches may fall out very easily. Also, the tips are often sharp but not too sharp, and some of these needles are not hollow, so they can be a bit heavier. Also, they will feel a bit colder in your hands, and again, the smaller sizes will end up crooked over time. And last but certainly not least, there are carbon or carbon technology needles. Carbon is both super light and super durable, and it actually feels quite warm in your hands. It also has quite a nice friction, while metal tips will allow for fast knitting. Especially if you love knitting with small sizes, there's probably no better choice available, because carbon will always snap back into place, plus they are available down to 1 millimeter. On the negative side, the tips are often glued to the body, so there is a little transition, and if there are no metal tips, well, they are a bit more slow, even sluggish to knit with. They can also be a bit on the pricier side, and usually the tips aren't all that sharp either. Now let's wrap things up. Which are the best double-pointed knitting needles? As I said it before, I'm not going to announce a winner here, but I still wanted to give you some pointers. One thing I have to add right away is that I think of double-pointed knitting needles as a disposable product. Most of them will break, splinter, or end up crooked sooner than later, and it's actually quite easy to lose one of the 5 needles as well. So it's probably wiser to put the focus on the knitting qualities and maybe not buy the most expensive set if you cannot afford it. If you are a beginner, then bamboo needles will be a great and affordable choice. For knitters who love to knit with really small sizes, then I don't think there is a way around the Karbonz needles, and lace knitters will probably enjoy the ultra sharp tips of the HiyaHiya needles, though the Addi colibri needles are very nice in that regard as well. If you want it as fast as possible, the Knitter's Pride Nova Platina are probably hard to beat, while needles like the Zing, the Dreamz, or the ChiaoGoo are a very versatile product for intermediate knitters. Now, I do have to mention that there are other brands out there, like Takumi. They produce some nice bamboo needles, but I personally don't knit with bamboo needles anymore, and I kind of feel they are all the same. There are also new products available with, small needles with flexible mini cables in between. Addi produces them. There are the ChiaoGoo minis. But this video is already long enough and I sadly couldn't include it all, but I do have a full ChiaoGoo review here on my channel where I talk about the minis. I'll link it to you up in here. I always seem to get this wrong. Still, if there is a product out there you want me to review, please comment below and I see what I can do. At the end of the day, I do recommend you to try out different brands. I hope my video was able to give you a general direction, but when it comes to the fine details, you really have to knit a pair of socks with them to be able to judge them correctly. Also, your preferences will change over time, so definitely remember to try out those slick metal needles later on, even if you didn't like them initially. Anyway, that was my video with the best double-pointed knitting needles. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, comment with your questions and your feedback, and of course consider subscribing to my channel in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.